My dad cut me off for being irresponsible, so I bought his house and evicted him. So, where do I even begin? I guess I should start by saying that my relationship with my dad has always been complicated. I wouldn't call it bad exactly, at least not when I was a kid, but looking back, I can see now that it was never really good either. My dad was the kind of man who built his whole personality around being self-made. You know the type. The ones who love to talk about how they pulled themselves up by their bootstraps, how they never needed a handout, how kids these days are just soft and entitled. And if you ever dared to suggest that maybe, just maybe, he had some advantages in life, he'd shut that down real quick. I never got a damn thing for free, he'd say. Everything I have, I earned with my own two hands. Which wasn't entirely true. See, my dad liked to pretend that he built his business from the ground up, but the reality was that he inherited a pretty decent sum of money from my grandfather. Nothing crazy, but enough to give him a solid head start. He used that money to open a small contracting company, which eventually grew into something successful. And hey, I'm not saying he didn't work hard. He did, but the whole "I did it all on my own" narrative? Yeah, that was a lie. But he still held me and my brother to a completely different standard. There were no handouts for us. Everything was about discipline and personal responsibility. If we wanted something, we had to earn it. And in his mind, earning it meant following the exact path he had laid out for us. My older brother, Adam, had no problem with that. He was the golden child, the one who actually listened. He went to college, got a real job in finance, and made my dad proud. Me? I was the screw-up. Not because I got into trouble or anything, I never did. I just had different ambitions. I didn't want to follow in my dad's footsteps. I didn't want to work a boring corporate job, climbing some company ladder just to make someone else rich. I wanted to build something of my own. When I told my dad I wanted to start my own business, he laughed in my face. You? Running a business? You can't even change a damn tire. Stop wasting your time with pipe dreams, son. You're not that kind of guy. I was 20 years old, broke, and living at home while I worked on my startup. And yeah, I'll admit it, I was struggling. I had no experience, no connections, and barely any money. But I was grinding. I spent every waking moment trying to make it work. I barely slept. I barely ate anything that wasn't instant ramen. I poured everything I had into making this dream a reality. I thought maybe, just maybe, if I proved myself, my dad would finally respect me. Then one morning, everything changed. I walked into the living room and saw my dad standing there, holding a piece of paper. His expression was unreadable, calm, almost casual. I glanced at the letter in his hand. My name was on it. Eviction papers. At first, I actually laughed. I thought it was a joke. It wasn't. "I'm done supporting you," he said, his voice flat and final. "You're 20 years old, not a kid. It's time for you to learn some responsibility." I just stared at him, my brain struggling to catch up. "What?" I managed to get out. "Are you serious?" He didn't even hesitate. "This little business of yours is a waste of time. Either get a real job or figure it out on your own." And just like that, I was out. No warning, no discussion, just a cold, emotionless decision. Like kicking me out was the same as taking out the trash. I had $300 to my name. No apartment, no backup plan. I begged him for just a little more time, just a couple of months to get on my feet. He smirked, actually smirked. "A man makes his own way, son. This is for your own good." And with that, he shut the door in my face. That was the last conversation we had for years. I stood there for a long time, just staring at the front door. It didn't feel real. One second, I was in my childhood home, the place I had lived my whole life. The next, I was standing outside with nothing but a duffel bag full of clothes and a pit in my stomach the size of a crater. I kept expecting my dad to open the door again, to say, "All right, that's enough. You've learned your lesson." But the door stayed closed. And that's when it hit me. He wasn't joking. He really had just tossed me out like garbage. I pulled out my phone, my hands shaking, and called my brother. Straight to voicemail. I called again. Nothing. Adam had to know about this, right? My dad wouldn't just throw me out without telling him. But he never called me back. I was officially on my own. I spent the next few hours sitting at a bus stop, trying to figure out what the hell I was supposed to do next. I had nowhere to go. No friends who could take me in. No savings. No credit. And my business? It was barely surviving as it was. Up until that point, I had been working out of my bedroom, using my dad's Wi-Fi, eating whatever food was in the fridge. I wasn't paying rent. I wasn't paying utilities. I had been fully dependent on my home environment to survive. Without it, I had nothing. I checked my bank account. $300. That was it. That was all I had to my name. And that's when I realized exactly how screwed I was. I spent my first night sleeping in my car. Well, technically, it wasn't even my car. It was an old beater my dad had given me when I turned 16, a rusted-out Honda that smelled like Jim's socks and despair. I parked it behind a Walmart and tried to get comfortable, but between the cold and the stress, I barely slept at all. The next morning, I woke up starving. I scraped together some change and bought the cheapest thing I could find, a gas station hot dog that tasted like regret and crushed dreams. And as I sat there in my car, eating the saddest meal of my life, I had one overwhelming thought. I can't live like this. I had to make my business work. There was no other option. So that's exactly what I did. I spent the next few months grinding harder than I ever had in my life. I got a cheap gym membership, not for working out, but for the showers. I slept in my car. I ate the absolute bare minimum to survive. And I worked nonstop. They say desperation is the best motivator. I never really understood that until I found myself waking up in the backseat of my car every morning, freezing my ass off with nothing but a gym locker to keep my belongings in. When I first got kicked out, I told myself I'd figure things out in a month. 2 months tops. That was bullshit. A month passed. Then 2. Then 3. And I was still struggling. At first, I tried to get office space. I thought I needed a real setup to make my business work. But that was impossible. Even the cheapest co-working spaces were way out of my budget. So I got creative. Coffee shops became my office. I'd buy a single black coffee and stretch it out for 6 hours just so I could use their Wi-Fi. Sometimes I pretend I was waiting for a friend just so the baristas wouldn't side-eye me for sitting there too long. Libraries were my conference rooms. When I had to hop on a video call with a client, I'd find a quiet corner, slap on a button-up shirt over my hoodie, and pray nobody kicked me out for talking too loud. And my car? That was home. I had my laptop. I had my phone. That was all I needed. At first, I was taking whatever work I could find. Logo design, website coding, SEO consulting, marketing strategy. I wasn't a master at any of it, but I learned fast. If a client asked if I could do something, I'd say yes first, and then spend the next 12 hours figuring it out. Google became my best friend. YouTube was my mentor. My first big gig, a guy from some random startup needed a website built in a week. The budget? $500. That was more money than I'd seen in months. I worked day and night on that project, barely sleeping, living off gas station snacks and caffeine pills. By the time I was done, I had pulled 3 all-nighters, but the site was perfect. The client? He was blown away. And that's when something clicked. He told me, "Dude, I've worked with freelancers before, but you actually care. You're gonna go far." And then he did something unexpected. He sent 3 more clients my way. Word spread. Clients started recommending me. I wasn't just some random freelancer anymore. I was the guy who delivered. At first, I was charging $500 per project, then $1,000, then $2,000. By the time I turned 21, I was making enough to finally move out of my car. I found a tiny studio apartment. No furniture, no real kitchen, just a mattress on the floor and a single hot plate. But after months of sleeping in a Walmart parking lot, it felt like a goddamn mansion. I cried the first night I slept in a real bed again. The moment I had stability, I doubled down. I stopped thinking of myself as just a freelancer and started building a brand. I gave my business a real name. I designed a sleek website, built up my social media, started networking like crazy. I reached out to people everywhere. Reddit, Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook groups. If someone even hinted that they needed digital work, I was in their DMs. And it paid off. By the time I was 22, I wasn't just surviving. I was thriving. I went from barely affording food to turning down projects because I had too much work. I raised my rates. I hired people. I stopped taking on $500 gigs and started landing $10,000 contracts. By 23, my business hit 6 figures. By 24, I was making more in a month than my dad made in a year. And by 25, I had employees, a real team, a fancy downtown office, and more money than I ever thought I'd see in my entire life. And the crazy part? I did it all without him. Through it all, my dad, radio silence. Not a single call. Not a single text. I never reached out to him either. I told myself I didn't care. But deep down, I knew I was waiting for this moment. The moment when he'd see my name. The moment when he'd hear about what I had built. The moment when he'd realize just how wrong he was. And then, karma knocked on my door. Or more accurately, it rang my phone. It was a Thursday afternoon. I was in my office, half listening to a meeting while scrolling through emails when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Hello. A voice I hadn't heard in years crackled through the speaker. Hey, I don't know if you remember me, but it's Mike, your dad's old friend. That got my attention. Mike was one of those family friends who had been around my whole childhood, always at barbecues, always at birthday parties. He and my dad used to be tight. So why the hell was he calling me now? Yeah, I remember you, I said carefully. What's up? There was a long pause. Then Mike sighed. Look, I don't know if you've heard, but your dad's in some deep shit. I felt nothing, not even curiosity, just a dull, vague sense of what kind of shit? I asked. Financial, Mike said. Really bad. His business went under last year. And, well, the bank's foreclosing on his house. I almost laughed. The house. My childhood home. The same house where he had kicked me out like I was nothing. And now, it was being taken from him. That's rough, I said flatly. Mike hesitated. Look, kid, I know things between you and your dad weren't great, but he could really use some help right now. I let that sit for a second. Help. The man who had thrown me into the street with $300 to my name was now the one needing my help? It would have been funny if it wasn't so goddamn poetic. So what? You think I should give him money? I asked, half amused. Mike sighed again. Not exactly. I don't know. Figured you might want to know what's going on before it's too late. Too late for what? Before he loses everything. I glanced at my laptop, my fingers already typing. When's the auction? I asked. Mike hesitated. Why does that matter? Just tell me. He exhaled sharply. Next month. They already sent him the notice. I smiled. Good to know, I said. Thanks for the call, Mike. And then I hung up. I pulled up my laptop and searched the foreclosure listing. Sure enough, there it was. The house I had grown up in. The house my father had always acted like was some untouchable monument to his success. It was up for grabs. I could buy it, right out from under him. I thought about all the nights I had spent sleeping in my car. The days when I had to choose between buying food or keeping my phone on. The way my dad had smirked when he threw me out. A man makes his own way, son. Fine. I made my own way. Now it was his turn. I'd spent the last 5 years grinding my way from rock bottom to the top. I had gone from homeless and broke to running a business that made more in a month than my dad ever made in a year. Now, I had the perfect opportunity to close the loop. The house, the same house I'd been thrown out of, the same house where my dad had stood on the porch and watched me beg for more time, was going up for auction, and I was going to buy it, in cash. The day of the auction, I didn't dress flashy. No expensive suit. No fancy watch. I wanted to blend in. I threw on a simple hoodie, a cap, and sunglasses. Just another nameless bidder in a sea of vultures circling my father's dying financial corpse. The auction was being held at a hotel conference room. A bunch of property investors, real estate sharks, and desperate homeowners filled the seats. And then, there he was. My father. He looked different. Older. More tired. His usual arrogance was gone, replaced with something I had never seen before. Desperation. For the first time in my life, my father actually looked small. He wasn't the towering figure from my childhood anymore. He was just another washed-up businessman who had made too many bad bets and lost. And he was fighting like hell to get the house back. I watched him from the back of the room as the auction started. The opening bid was low, about a quarter of the house's original value. A couple of bidders raised their hands. The price crept up. Then my father's voice rang out. 100,000. He was trying, probably scraping together whatever savings he had left, maybe even borrowing from old business contacts. I let him think he had a chance. The bidding continued, slowly climbing. 150, my father called out, his voice strained. Silence. For a moment, I almost thought he was going to win. Then I raised my hand. 300,000. Cash. Every head in the room snapped toward me, including my father's. His face twisted in confusion at first. He squinted, trying to recognize me through my sunglasses. Then realization hit. His eyes widened. His mouth fell open just slightly. I didn't smile, didn't say a word, just stared him down. The auctioneer waited. Do I hear 350? Silence. My father's face turned red. He gritted his teeth, gripping the back of the chair in front of him so hard his knuckles turned white. I could see it, the war in his head. His pride was screaming at him to fight. But he knew. He was out of his depth. He had spent his whole life telling me I was a failure, that I would never make it, that I needed to get a real job and stop chasing stupid dreams. His own son, the son he had abandoned, was standing between him and the house he was desperately trying to save. The auctioneer repeated himself. 350. Nothing. My father didn't move. He didn't even look at me anymore. The hammer came down. Sold. 300,000. To the gentleman in the back. I had won. The house was mine. After the auction ended, I walked straight past my father without acknowledging him. I didn't need to rub it in. He already knew. But as I was heading toward the exit, I heard his footsteps behind me. Wait. I stopped. Slowly, I turned around. He looked at me, his face unreadable. He swallowed, his voice unsteady. You bought the house? I let a slow smirk creep onto my face. No, Dad, I said, tilting my head slightly. I bought my house. You were just borrowing it. His mouth opened, then closed. He had nothing to say. For the first time in his entire life, he was speechless. I didn't waste any time. The paperwork was signed, and I officially owned the house within the week. I could have kicked my father out immediately. But no, I wanted him to feel it. I wanted him to wake up every single day knowing that the roof over his head no longer belonged to him. So I gave him 1 month, 30 days to pack up, figure out where he was going, and face the reality that he was no longer the king of his castle. I moved in the next day. The first thing I did? Changed the locks. Not that I thought he'd try anything, but it was symbolic. His key, worthless now, just like the way he had tossed me aside like I was nothing all those years ago. I didn't throw out any of his things. I didn't move his stuff into the garage like he had done to me when he evicted me. I let him watch. Every day I moved my things in, room by room, piece by piece, while he sat there, silently fuming. He didn't talk to me, didn't ask me for help, didn't try to argue. He just existed in the background, watching as his world crumbled around him. I enjoyed every second of it. On the morning of day 30, I knocked on his bedroom door. When he opened it, I handed him an envelope. Eviction notice. His face went pale. You can't do this to me. I didn't respond. He opened the envelope, his hands shaking as he read the letter. His eyes flicked back up to me, pleading. You wouldn't throw your own father out. I'm just making sure you learn personal responsibility, Dad. I said calmly. You always said I needed that. His mouth opened, but no words came out. For the first time in his life, he had nothing to say. There was something about that moment, standing in the doorway of his bedroom, watching him clutch that eviction notice with trembling hands, that felt surreal. For years, I had replayed our last conversation in my head. The moment he stood in that same doorway and threw me out of this house without a shred of hesitation. I had begged him for more time. I had pleaded, and he had smirked. A man makes his own way, son. This is for your own good. Now here he was, a broken man, looking at me with the same desperation I had once looked at him with. And I felt nothing. Not anger, not satisfaction, just cold detachment. The days leading up to his eviction were painfully awkward. At first, he tried to ignore reality. He still went about his usual routine, waking up at the crack of dawn, sitting at the kitchen table with his coffee like nothing had changed, like he still belonged here. But he was quieter now. The usual arrogance in his posture, gone. He didn't even try to argue with me, didn't try to guilt-trip me, didn't try to bring up family loyalty like I had expected him to, because deep down, he knew he had no leg to stand on. The day after I handed him the papers, I noticed he spent hours sitting in his room, staring at the walls. I could hear the occasional creak of the floorboards when he paced, the occasional scrape of a chair being dragged across the floor. I wondered what was going through his head. If he was thinking about how different things could have been. If he was regretting the moment he threw me out. Probably not. People like him don't feel regret. They just feel anger that the world didn't bend to their will. With 1 week left, he finally broke. It was late at night. I had just finished up some work and was sitting in the living room when I heard him shuffle into the doorway. For a moment, he just stood there, staring at the floor. Then, In a voice I had never heard from him before, he muttered, "We need to talk." I raised an eyebrow. About what? He cleared his throat, swallowed hard, visibly struggled to get the words out. "Look, I know things have been rough between us, but this house, it's my home." He exhaled sharply. "Can't we work something out? Work something out?" I repeated, shaking my head. "You didn't seem interested in working something out when I was the one on the street." He flinched. I had never seen him flinch before. "That was different," he muttered. "You were young. You needed to learn responsibility. It wasn't personal." Not personal? This man had thrown me away like I was a piece of trash. And now he wanted me to believe it wasn't personal? I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. "Tell me, Dad, what do you think I should do here?" He opened his mouth, then closed it. His eyes darted around the room like he was searching for the right answer. He finally said, "I could pay rent. I don't have a lot of money right now, but I could figure something out. I just need time to get back on my feet." Time. The same thing I had begged him for. I exhaled through my nose, shaking my head. "No." His eyes snapped up. "No. You taught me a valuable lesson, Dad. A man makes his own way. This is for your own good." His face twisted. For a second, I thought he was going to lash out, throw a tantrum, yell, demand that I respect him. But instead, he just stood there, silent, like he finally understood that I wasn't that scared, desperate kid anymore. After a long pause, he nodded stiffly. Then, without another word, he turned and walked back to his room. The morning of the eviction, he was already gone when I woke up. No note, no bouvier, just an empty room where my father used to sleep. And honestly, that was fitting. There was nothing left to say. I walked through my house for the first time in years, and just let it sink in. Everything felt lighter. The air didn't feel thick with tension anymore. There was no longer some overbearing force looming over me, waiting for me to fail. I had won, not just in a petty revenge way, though, yeah, this was satisfying as hell. I had won because I had made something of myself, because I had proven to myself that I never needed him. And now, my father had to figure out how to make his own way. As he always told me,